others do not.
Well, for more on Syria, we can now talk to Danny Makki. He's activist and co-founder of the Syrian Youth in Britain. Danny, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has also said that Russia is not in the regime change game. Assad is still in power, and yet Western countries are still playing that game. Why?
There's many reasons why Western countries would still be playing that game. Syria is a state which has not really had great relations with the West because of its political stances towards certain Arab issues. So Russia clearly supports a political solution in Syria. They reject changing the regime by force or a Western-administered formula of regime change, which happened in Libya. So Russia rejects the Libya scenario and the Iraq scenario of divide and conquer, which is portrayed by Western countries. So it's very important here to see that Sergei Lavrov, as discussed in your report, promotes a political solution and understands that the Syrian opposition leaders need to really negotiate with the Syrian government in order to find a political solution to the ongoing crisis in Syria. So some of the Western countries, through the funding and arming of rebels and opposition fighters, have essentially acted as a blocked any political solution which could happen in the future, as they have essentially allied themselves with the armed opposition, and they are seeking regime change in a non-direct, inadvertent way, as opposed to a direct Libya-style intervention.
And you're there in London, and the UK has just confirmed that it will be supplying more support to the Syrian opposition, yet British MPs there in London are saying this could actually turn into an Iraqi-style military intervention. You've been talking about Libya. Do you see similarities that something like that could happen there in Syria as what we saw in Iraq?
Iraq is probably the more similar scenario to Syria than Libya, as there's no real desire for real military intervention in Syria. The real manifestation of double standards is truly shown in the Syria crisis, where you have William Hague, who stated that there is a great threat of terrorism, threat of jihadis coming back from Syria, having an ideology of killing, which is going back to Britain. There is British jihadis. The first British jihadi was killed 2 days ago. So there is a real threat from Islamic terrorism coming from Syria, and he says that we must stop Syria from becoming a bed or a kind of hub of terrorism. At the same time, he claims he wants to arm the Syrian opposition. He wants to give them non-lethal aid. He wants to provide armoured vehicles to provide humanitarian assistance to the Syrian opposition. So it's a policy of hypocrisy, which is fueled with a lack of understanding of what is happening within the Arab world and within Syria.
Well, hasn't that, just let me ask you, has that lack of understanding now been displayed by the fact we're seeing those hostages taken by Syrian rebels there near to the border of Israel, who are supposedly, being part of the Syrian National Coalition, part of the opposition?
Of course. When you, the issue of moderate rebels is essentially a facade. The majority of rebel forces in Syria are Islamic, and the West know this. So in order to kind of to get out of the concept of that we're funding the opposition in Syria, they're using the term moderate opposition. But the fact that they kidnapped up to 20 peacekeeping forces in the Golan Heights showed that these groups have no relation to democracy, that they do not comprehend the idea of peace, that they want to create a problem between the United Nations and between Syria, that they want to create more tensions between Syria and Israel. And these groups are essentially backed by the West politically. Non-lethal aid is getting to them on a daily basis. And the fact that they kidnapped these forces, who are from the UN, they have no relation with the fighting, and the fact that they claim they would be used as prisoners or hostages shows the real level of barbarism, the level of non-understanding by these Syrian rebels that they are not liberal forces. The majority of them are extremists, and they pose a significant problem to all of the United Nations peacekeeping forces in the area, as they use them to kind of get out of armed struggles with the Syrian army, which was conducting a military operation in the region.
Danny, thank you for your thoughts. Danny Makki there, activist and co-founder of the Syrian Youth there in Britain.